Miguel told me, "I need you to sign these papers, Mama. It's only for a temporary care home while we fix your bathroom." His voice sounded hollow against the tiles of my kitchen. I felt a hollow open in my stomach when I saw the word permanent crossed out with a pen on one of the pages. I held the blue folder and the tea slipped from my hands until it went cold. I had painted this kitchen myself after 3 years of eating leftovers so I could save for repairs. Every brushstroke was small victory, every emptied plate had been a promise to myself that one day my house would be mine, finished and whole. My hands began to tremble. Those keys I wear on a red cord around my neck are more than metal. They are my independence, the thing I earned with my own labor. From the other room I heard Daniela on the phone, her voice bright and quick. "Yes, it's almost ready. Soon we can sell it." The light from the window slashed across the table and left the folder half in shadow. It wasn't the bathroom they wanted to change. It was my life they were trying to erase. I looked at Miguel. He pushed the papers toward me as if they were harmless. I tasted salt not from soup, but from the sudden heat of betrayal. I would not disappear into someone else's plan. I would not sign. That scene didn't come from nowhere. To understand why it hit me like a blow, you need to know who I am and what every brick of this house cost me. I could say my life is simple, and that would be true, but simple is not the same as easy. Every morning I learned how to survive and to keep my dignity. I worked until my hands ached, and I kept going because promises to my son mattered more than my tired bones. I live in Ciudad Juarez, in a small house on a street where the pavement remembers footsteps. The kind of street where neighbors call your name from porches and where you can hear the vendor's cart 3 blocks away. My house is modest, a low roof, curtains stitched from old fabric, plants growing in tin cans. People might look and see only a little house. I see a life. I see every peso counted, every hour traded for a roof, the nights I slept on the floor so Miguel could have a bed. I see a ledger of quiet sacrifices. I worked cleaning other people's houses for 35 years. I woke before dawn and came home after night had fallen. The smell of bleach is in my memory like a second skin. My hands are proof calloused, familiar with hard work. I scrubbed floors and did other people's laundry, and I learned how to stretch wages until they folded into something that could pay for school books, for a uniform, for a small meal without shame. I did not ask for thanks. I asked only to be able, one day, to own a place that carried my name in the title. Raising a child alone changes you. When his father left, Miguel was only 3. Whoever has raised a child knows the strange balance, to hold them and to teach them to stand. I taught him to tie shoes, how to tell the time, how to apologize when he had been wrong. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes cleaning during the day and ironing at night so he could eat and go to school. I missed birthdays sometimes because overtime paid for a book or for a school trip. I believed then that love could be measured in bread bought and a clean uniform handed over each morning. I always thought that raising him with values would be enough. I taught him to say please and thank you. I taught him to fold his clothes and to fix what he could with a piece of thread and a lot of patience. I taught him, without naming it, that a home is more than walls, it is effort and care. When I stood in the doorway and watched him walk to school, there was a fierce pride in me that felt like armor. That armor lasted a long time. There were moments I swallowed small humiliations, thinking it was for peace. Daniela came into our lives and she brought a tone that sometimes sat wrong with me. She has never said directly cruel things, but the look when she sees my curtains or the toast of her voice when she suggests helpful changes stung. I remember once, at a family dinner, she picked up a chipped plate and said, "You should throw these out, Mama. They're embarrassing." I smiled and changed the subject, and later, when I washed the dishes alone, I felt the words like a small crack along something I had tried to keep intact. You learn to be quiet because shouting often breaks more than the voice. For years I practiced staying calm. It's easier to keep peace, I would tell myself. I kept silence because arguments meant coldness later, and alone is heavier when the world is already heavy. So I tolerated small slights. I tolerated the way my son started to answer me with less warmth. I tolerated the jokes at my expense about my old pots and my mending. I tolerated because I thought families should be kept whole, and I thought time would smooth rough edges. But tolerance has a limit. There is a point when it stops being patience and becomes permission. The papers Miguel put in front of me were not a single moment of thoughtlessness. They were the end product of months of small erasures. The notebook where I kept receipts had a page missing. A friend mentioned seeing Daniela with an agent. Miguel started to bring guys over who measured and took pictures under the pretense of helping. I noticed my strengths were being counted as liabilities, and my quiet life catalogued like a property to convert. I need you to pause with me for a moment. If this channel is new for you, and you want more stories like this, your support matters. Reaching 1,000 subscribers helps us share these voices wider. If you have a moment, please tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Hearing that strengthens me more than you know. I chose that blue sky blouse the morning I went to the notary. Clothing matters sometimes not for vanity, but because we present the shape of ourselves to the world. I wanted to be the same woman who had signed the last payment on that lot years ago, the woman who had walked up the steps with her receipt clasped like a rosary. I wanted to show up as someone who still remembered the courage it takes to claim what you built. The notary's office smelled of paper and ink. The man behind the desk knew me. He had watched my name under different hands over the years. We sat and we spoke plainly. He told me, "No one can sell your house without your consent." His voice was not a comfort so much as a confirmation, something legal and cold that steadied me. Leaving the office, clutching the certified copy of my deed, I felt a small heat of victory. It was a paper, yes, but it had weight. It was proof somebody could not deny without being caught. I put that paper in my bag and it felt like a small fire, something to bring light. I also asked him to write a note, a short declaration that any transaction on my property would require my physical presence at the notary. He stamped it. The stamp felt like a fist knocking on a table, a firm, legal sound that meant no. After the notary, I went to the bank. I have a small account there, the sort of account that holds the few hundred pesos you save when you have no margin. The girl at the counter looked at my old card and then at a form. "Someone tried to be added as a co-owner last week," she said, "but the signatures didn't match." I had a flash of a sore place in my ribs. "Would you like to file a report?" she asked. I thought of calling Miguel across the table and asking him, why? Why would you risk this? I did not call him. I changed my passwords instead, and I set alerts on my phone so that every movement on my account would ping me. Small protections, but this is how you begin when you have little to trade. You protect what you can. I went home and stopped at Estella's. Estella is the one who always smelled of lavender and had a rosary wrapped around her wrist. She looked at me and knew, because her eyes do that thing when a friend needs more than good wishes. "Don't be alone with this," she said. She offered me her son's help. He works at an electronics shop. We agreed on something quiet, a camera in my living room, small and hidden, just in case. We did not speak of confrontation as a spectacle. We spoke of the need to have truth recorded like a witness who cannot be bought. That night, from the small house across the street, I could see my living room through Estella's old phone. The camera's lens caught the threadbare couch, the shelf with the old radio, the little square of kitchen floor I had scrubbed that afternoon. I learned how to watch without being seen. It is a strange feeling, to be both observer and protector. You learn a new kind of vigilance, but the wall was not to keep me safe from outside danger alone. It was to keep me from being erased by the hands of those I trusted. I realized patience had to become strategy. I had to shift from keeping the family peace to keeping myself whole. When I cooked the next Sunday for the grandchildren, there was a different air around me. I still made the tortillas and the beans and that mole I had learned from my mother. I still measured salt with the same careful hand. But I watched them differently now, looking at how Miguel's glance slipped to the corner where the folder lay in his hand, seeing Daniela's fingers toy with a business card she kept in her purse. I kept my voice calm. I set plates down with quiet deliberation. When Daniela said, "This place has potential," I answered with my own truth and not with an apology. I stayed silent, but not forgotten. 6 months before the papers, Sundays were ordinary, noisy, and full of the small rituals that stitch families together. I rose at 5 a.m., fingers stiff with the memory of a life in labor, to make the food that felt like home. The smell of frying corn and beans filled the house. I would light the small stove and the morning light would come in soft through those curtains I had sewn. The children ran in and out, Carlitos with a comic in his hand and Sofia with a ribbon in her hair. Canela, my stray, would dance at their feet and I would laugh because she had a way of making everyone slower and kinder. That Sunday, Daniela arrived with a look I knew too well, a measuring eye that turned comfort into commodity. She walked through the rooms as if inspecting a stage set. I passed plates around and heard her whisper into Miguel's ear, "This place has potential. With the new houses they built in the Colonia, we could get a good price." Her voice was low, casual, like a someone pointing at a sale at the Mercado. Miguel nodded, but he did not look at me. To him, perhaps, it was practical talk. To me, it sounded like measuring a life against a number. Afterward, I washed the dishes with the hot water stinging my hands. The plates were still warm and the house smelled of people who had been fed. As I wiped a pan, I could see them moving through the living room with their eyes. I saw how they measured the wall where I had painted a flower, where I had practiced a color that made the room lighter. They spoke softly about layouts and buyers, as if the place that held my memories could be rearranged into profit. I kept my mouth closed because I had practiced peace for so long. Micro-conflicts began to stack like delicate plates. A comment at the Mercado. Antonia, my neighbor, pulled me aside and asked in a voice that dropped when someone else was near, "Rosa, is it true? Are you selling?" I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, and I felt the floor tilt. The ledger in my head, the notary receipt, the bank passbook suddenly had missing lines. I went home and opened the little drawer where I kept the deed. It was not there. I felt a coldness like someone had taken the heat from the room. It was a small, ordinary thing, a missing paper, and it was the beginning of everything. The night I couldn't sleep, I sat on the porch and Canela curled on my feet. The sky was the kind of black that makes your chest sound hollow. I thought of the day I finally paid the last installment on the land. I had been poor and proud then. The notary made a small ceremony of it. He handed me the papers and I held them like an answer. I had not imagined that the answer would one day need to be defended on the street where my neighbors sell tortillas. Then the visits changed texture. Miguel began to come during the week, not to talk but to check a leak or fix a window. He took pictures of the backyard as if cataloging it. Once, I found him taking photos with his phone, pointing at the patch of dirt where a tree used to be. "What are you doing, hijo?" I asked. "Just thinking of a little garden," he said. He smiled and it didn't reach his eyes. A week later, he came with an architect. The young man measured and jotting numbers, talking about opening the space and investing. The way they spoke about my home felt like a language that did not include me. I told Miguel plainly, I don't have money for renovations, and he said, "Don't worry, Mama. I'll take care of it." His words rested like a coin on the table, cool, and not mine. Daniela started leaving catalogs open on the coffee table. They were glossy and polished with smiling elders and manicured lawns. "Look how nice these communities are," she said one afternoon, smudging the pages with her well-manicured nails. "You'd have company, you'd be looked after." There was a softness in what she said, a marketing smile. But under the words was the plan to move me out temporarily, to put me somewhere designed to look like care and not like removal. I tried to answer with small truths. I have Canela. I have my neighbors. But the conversation shifted as if I had not spoken. When I returned from the mercado one day, Canela was shivering in the yard and the gate was closed. Daniela was inside, chatting with a woman wearing a badge that said, Martinez Real Estate. They greeted me with that practiced warmth people use when they know their claim will be easier if you think they are helping. That night I found the drawer where I kept the deed had been rifled. The notary paper was gone. I felt something in my chest pull tight, not just because of the loss, but because someone had actually reached into my private place and taken what proved I had been right all along to build this house. Someone had assumed they could touch my proof. They came that day with the blue folder to my kitchen, smiling with a rehearsed ease. Miguel said, "We have a surprise for you, Mama." Daniela held herself stiff, wearing a smile that didn't touch the eyes. They opened the folder and brandished papers that they called the solution. "We found a wonderful place where you'll rest and have medical care. Like a hotel for the elderly," Miguel said. I looked at the document and noticed the ink, the small, slick signatures. Daniela said, "Your bathroom needs urgent repairs. While it's being fixed, you can stay in this place. It will be temporary." She laid the papers in front of me. My hands touched the paper and I read. I read the word that had been scratched through, the word permanent, with a pen strike like a dirty correction. My eyes dropped lower and I found a clause granting Miguel representative authority on matters of property. It felt like the room had spun. "And this part about real estate matters?" I asked. Miguel's face tightened. "It is standard procedure, Mama," he said. The voice was too flat. Daniela left the room to take a call, and the door stood slightly open. I heard her whisper, "Yes, it's almost ready. Soon we can sell." That whisper landed like a stone. In a moment, the house I had built with my hands and my fasting, with nights counted in my fists, was being discussed like a business asset. It wasn't the bathroom they cared for. It was the potential profit. I asked, quietly so my heart wouldn't run away from me, "Where is the deed? The original that I kept in my desk?" Miguel stammered, "What deed?" I said, "The one I saved for years, the one the notary gave me." He answered as if pity were a weapon, "Maybe you put it somewhere else, Mama. At your age it's normal to forget." The words hit like a slap. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to make me believe I had lost my own mind. I left them that night without signing. The neighborhood lights had that small yellow glow, and my chair on the porch held me like an accusation. I thought of all the times I had swallowed a comment, had gone without, had said nothing to keep the house whole. I thought of the notary's stamp in my bag, the bank clerk's warning, the small camera that could not be erased. My silence had been a shield, now it felt like a trap. That night I decided not to be invisible. I would not be moved like furniture. I would not be replaced with a glossy brochure. I would not hand over my keys because of smiles that didn't reach the hands that offered them. The next morning I would act. I would not sign. The visits that had felt like small stones started to become a steady rain. I noticed it first in the way Miguel's hands moved through my rooms, not with the tenderness of a son, but with the economy of someone cataloging goods. His fingers would— She did that thing with her hand, patting the brochure like petting a sales pitch. They were patient with me in a way that felt practiced. That patience had edges. I noticed small changes in routine that began to feel deliberate. Miguel started dropping by during the week with explanations that fit like thin clothes over a shadow. "I'm just fixing the leak," he'd say, and then he would stand too long in my kitchen, lifting lids, looking beneath the sink, feeling the mortar in the wall as if assessing how easily it could be removed. Once he offered to take some of my old pots to dispose of them. He returned with fewer than he had taken. Later, Daniela would make a small joke about hoarding in front of my neighbors and laugh when I did not. Their laughter landed like gravel. Kalei, mas neo skc. Antonia from the mercado pulled me aside one afternoon as she stacked oranges. Her voice was the low one neighbors use when they think words must be small to avoid hurting things. "Rosa, are you sure everything's okay?" she asked. I saw Daniela with a lady from real estate. They took pictures. The pulp of the orange in my hand left a sticky ring on my fingers. I had kept my teeth from asking. Now I could feel the question vibrating in my chest. That night I opened my little drawer where the deed had always been. The drawer smelled like lavender sachets and the underside of things kept safe. The place where my title should have rested was empty. A small wash of cold spread through me, like taking a breath underwater. I checked behind the ledger, in the envelope with the notary stamp, under the small stack of receipts. Gone. A missing paper felt like a small theft of air. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the house breathe. The radio on the shelf hummed low. My hands, those hands that had mixed cement and folded linens, shook and then did not. I told myself it could be a mistake. A mistake can be fixed. A removed paper can be found. But the thought that followed was heavier, that someone had reached into my private things and handled my proof as if they were entitled. A week folded into smaller incidents after that. Daniela started bringing up options more often, but always as a question posed to the room and not to me. "It would be easier for maintenance," she'd say at dinner, and her fork would trace designs in the mole. Miguel would nod and look at me only when the light hit the wrong angle. When my grandson Carlitos spilled juice on the table, Daniela tooted. "See? This is why older houses are a problem," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear through the thin walls. I watched them measure my life like one measures furniture to fit a new catalog. There were other days, small scenes that felt like test runs. Daniela would invite a woman with a badge for coffee. The visitor's voice was silk and practiced. She asked the prices of homes in the neighborhood in a tone that made those answers seem like numbers in a ledger. She smiled at me with the kind of warmth sold in brochures. I poured the coffee and felt like a ghost serving ghosts. I gave them biscuits, and the woman asked, "Does she get out much? Is she active?" as if I needed permission to be alive. Kalei, mas neo skc. The little things became evidence. Miguel began keeping a small blue folder in the center drawer, the one he used to open like a safe and close with the casualness of someone who has moved on to new priorities. Once, it was in the living room, and I saw a peek, signatures, a neat line of printed clauses, a stamp. On a morning when I told myself to be brave, I opened that drawer and the folder was gone. The blue cover had been removed from my sight and placed into their hands. At the mercado, the whispers sharpened. "They're talking about redevelopment in the colonia," one neighbor said. "Some families sell, others move to those new complexes. Big money." The words big money sounded foreign in my mouth, like a coin minted in another country. I had not raised my voice yet because raising my voice sometimes had the cost of being cut off. So I learned to listen, to follow the trail of smallness, snatches of conversation, a measuring tape left on the step, a realtor's card tucked under my teacup. Then came the night when the door opened and the blue folder appeared in the kitchen. Miguel smiled like someone bringing a surprise, but his eyes were flat. Daniela stood behind him with her coat half on, as if she would leave as soon as the lights showed what she wanted. They sat and told me stories of a place that sounded like a hotel but had the same small rooms as institutions often do. They called it temporary. They called it helpful. I held the papers in my hands and read. I could still see the stroke of the pen where a word had been crossed out and another slid in. I saw permanent with a messy line through it. I saw a clause about representative authority. My heart decided to be wild for a moment and then to be still. They had all the words ready. They waited for my hand to sign. I felt something in me harden. The room's air tasted like the dust after sweeping. I was holding pages that had not been pine or plaster, but my life stacked in legalese. The pages asked me to trade my days for convenience dressed as kindness. I did not sign. I set the papers down as if they had burned me and did not look at their faces. Daniela left to take a call and the door was left ajar. I heard her voice, lowered like a secret. "Yes, it's almost ready. Soon we can sell it," she whispered. It came across the threshold like a small stone leaving a window. That whisper hit me like a hand. The chair on the porch held me that night. The sky was a black cloth with small pinpricks of light. I watched the light and thought of all the small expenses, the years of eating leftovers to save for bricks. The idea that someone could come and make my life into a number felt obscene. A life is not a ledger. A life is the hands that know exactly how much water the beans need. A life is the radio that plays old songs at noon. A life is a dog who knows your steps. I had been silent for so long to keep the peace. Silence had been my armor. That night the armor felt like a trap. I would not be moved like furniture. The morning I found the proof, the light was thin and honest. I had slept little. The memory of Daniela's whisper had crawled under my skin and carried itself through the night. I dressed slowly, fingers finding the familiar loops of my blusa blue cielo. The blouse felt like an armor of cloth and habit. I held my cup of tea and tasted the bitter steadiness of it. I walked into my kitchen and there it was, the blue folder laid open on the table where I normally left a bread plate. My hands moved before my mind did, old hands with work ingrained in their fingers, and I picked up the top sheet. The room tightened, the radio in the corner hummed lower as if to give me space. The paper had that corporate smoothness that makes lies look polite. The first thing I saw was the handwriting. It was not mine. It was not the notary's. It was clean, quick. There was a section about temporary relocation during renovations, and another where representative authority was circled and initialed. And then, as if to make the package look like a favor, a scrawl through the word temporary, and a faint, pressured stroke where permanent had been written and then crossed out. The line looked like someone who wanted to hide their intentions with a correction instead of asking forgiveness. My breath went shallow. My palm went damp as if I had cooked over steam and then touched cold tile. The cup I had set down left a brown ring on the table and I did not wipe it. My eyes went to where the signature should be for me, and then, lower, to a clause granting rights over real estate transactions to another. I could read it even with the tremor. The grantor authorizes the representative to manage, sell, or otherwise dispose of property. The words were simple. They were sharp. I heard Miguel in the doorway, his posture casual, his hands in his pockets, and Daniela behind him, the rustle of a bag like a bird settling. Miguel sat and watched me with eyes that refused to meet mine. "We only want what's best for you," he said, voice leveled like an instruction. But the pages I held had already told me what they wanted. My body moved. It was what mothers had told sons for years, the promise dressed as comfort. But the sheet before me asked for my consent to be moved like a chess piece. I remember the sound the paper made as I slid it back into the folder. The paper's rustle was the sound of a life being refolded into someone else's hands. My chest felt narrow, as if someone had tied a ribbon around my ribs. I thought of the notary's stamp, of the day he had handed me the deed. I thought of paying the last peso, of the small ceremony where I had felt like I had purchased a piece of the future. The image wanted to come to me in a single frame: the man in the office, the paper weight, my hands trembling as I signed. Whoever had moved those pages had reached back into that moment and tried to erase it. My face must have shown it, because Miguel's next words were quick and sharp. "Maybe you put the deed somewhere else," he said. "You forget things sometimes, Mama. It's normal." His tone landed with the cruelty of a knife disguised as care. To suggest my mind had begun to slip was to set the stage for everything else, a preface to a story where her signature could be replaced. The room seemed to tilt. Daniela's laugh from the doorway was like someone flipping a page to a chapter already written. I heard the echo of her earlier whisper again, "Yes, it's almost ready. Soon we can sell it." That memory came up like bile. My hands found the small wooden box where I kept receipts. I had checked it before, but fear has a way of doubling your attention. The box was light. My ledger had a missing page, a tooth out of the mouth of my memory. Then I thought of the camera Estella had suggested, the one we planned to install, just in case. I thought of the nights I had been patient, the weight of being quiet to stop the house from fracturing. For a brief, bright second I wanted to shout until the walls gave way. Instead, I put the papers back into the folder slowly, with careful, deliberate movements. People think you must be loud to make a sound. I learned that a quiet motion can carry more proof. I did not explode. I catalogued. The first real sound in the kitchen after that was Daniela closing the door behind her. She must have thought she left it ajar to speak freely. She thought she was sly. She forgot the small things that betray intent, the way a hand tightens, the creak of a floorboard, the pattern of footsteps that always returns to the same spot. People forget they leave little signs behind. I stepped outside because the outside had stars and the sky did not try to sell me anything. I sat on the low wall at the foot of the garden and let the world be its honest dark. My hands rested in my lap and I felt a decision forming like frost along the edges of a window. I had been patient for a lifetime. I had been silent to keep peace that tasted like old soap and careful words. But patience had limits. This was not about a bathroom or better company. It was about the slow theft of my life. Something inside me that had been small and used to quietness made its voice. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was clear. I will not sign anything I don't understand, I told myself out loud, and the sentence sounded like the first brick placed in a small, necessary wall. After that, the kitchen felt changed. The air between us was a measured thing. Miguel looked as if someone had taken his map away. Daniela's expression shifted from the practiced warmth to an irritated tightness. She gathered her bag. She said the words people say when plans confront a truth, "Let's go, Miguel." They left, footsteps measured, like someone stepping back off a stage. The door closed behind them with a small click that resembled a lock engaging. I stayed at the wall and watched their car recede down the street. When it was gone, I felt both hollow and strangely awake. That night the house felt thin as paper. I sat with Canela, whose small weight on my knees felt like truth. I remembered every leftover meal I had swallowed so that one day I could buy a tile, a nail, a small bit of permanence. I remembered the notary handing me the deed like a promise. I had protected that promise once. I would protect it again. The life I had built did not belong to catalogs, to tidy brochures, to polite signatures that took everything but smiled. The life inside these walls was my proof. I would not let them take that proof. Something inside that had been sleeping began to get ready. The days after the discovery were slow as thick syrup. My hands that had once worked from dawn until dusk moved with a new carefulness. I cooked as always, but I measured my salt with a firmer thumb. I answered the phone when it rang and then let it ring. It was an odd dance, to go on with the small domestic things that stitch a life together while the inside of you rearranges like furniture after an earthquake. I could not sleep well. Nights were full of thinking that looped each circuit, taking me back to the blue folder, to the crossed-out word, to Daniela's whisper. I lay awake and watched the ceiling fan trace slow moons until my eyes felt gritty. When sleep came, it arrived in fits. I would wake at small noises, a distant dog, the radio from a neighbor, Canella shifting in her bed. Each sound made me check the locks with the ritual of someone testing a seam. Memory came in fragments, and each fragment brought both pain and clarity. I thought of the day I paid the last peso for the land. The notary's office smelled of old paper and coffee. The man who handed me the deed had nodded as if he understood the weight of a signature. I remembered how my hands shook when I filled in my name. I remembered thinking I had finally bought a place that would not be on credit or in someone else's paperwork. I had imagined giving that certainty to Miguel when I was gone, a small inheritance of dignity. I remembered moments that now looked like clues. The chipped plate Daniela said I should throw away, the way she smoothed the curtains I had sewn, the air of faint disgust when anyone mentioned the thrift of my plants grown in soup cans. Small humiliations had been handed to me wrapped in helpful words. I had swallowed them, more than once, because I thought it kept my family whole and because silence sometimes looks like strength to those who do not bear it. I saw myself in a dozen minor scenes, ironing shirts for other women at night while Miguel slept upstairs, missing a niece's birthday because I took on an extra shift, saving coins in an old tin labeled casa, and hearing the clink of each coin like beads on a rosary. Those small acts of self-denial now felt not noble but sacred and utterly mine. They were not to be sold. At the mercado, a woman who knew me from a lifetime, Senora Juana, who sold rebozos and folded advice like cloth, touched my arm. "Rosa, you look tired," she said. I wanted to tell her everything. Instead, I told her I was fine. Then I walked home with a weight that was not only mine. The knowledge that someone had tried to make me doubt myself, that was a wound that needed tending. There were nights when crying seemed a useless indulgence. So I let the tears come small and practical, as if washing the day's dust from my face. I would hold Canella and let the animal's small heart beat against my palm. Her warmth was honest and did not ask for consent. Dogs keep you anchored. She reminded me of the fact of my body and the small, certain things I needed to protect. The first clear turn from grief toward action did not arrive like a lightning strike. It arrived as a recalling of things I could do, practical little moves that felt like putting tools back into a box. I began making lists. The lists were short and literal: find deed copy, visit notary, change bank passwords, get camera footage saved, call Estella. Each line was a small promise to myself that I would not be adrift. I went back to the notary. Ramirez, with his paper face and slow, trustworthy voice, remembered me and paled a little when I told him what had happened. "If they have your original, you are still the owner," he said, his voice steady as a bench. "But we must be secure. I will make a certified copy and a public notice. And we will include a clause, no transaction without the owner present. The words legal and protection landed like warm bread. He helped me write a short formal declaration that would be stamped and thumbed and hard to erase. The bank was a different kind of ritual. The girl at the counter seeing it changed the taste of my fear. It made the abstract real. It made it provable. I printed frames that showed Miguel's profile and Daniela's fingers. I sent copies to Ramirez and to Victoria. The movement that had been only suspicion now had edges. The footage did not make my loss less, it made my response necessary. I remember the small decision like a quiet bell. I folded the prints and placed them into my bag. I wrote down the bank's number and the notary's direct line and the social worker's extension. I paused and touched the notarial copy Ramirez had given me that afternoon. It felt like a tiny shield in my hands. There were moments of doubt. You ask, do I prosecute my own son? The question sits like a stone in the palm. I thought of the boy who once held my hand when he fell, of the nights I sat up with fevers, and of the shared laughter in the kitchen when the grandchildren were small. I did not relish what I was doing. I only understood that protecting my life and my dignity sometimes requires the hardest love, the love of acting in truth even when the cost is a relationship. My voice changed. Not in decibel but in shape. I began to answer differently. When Miguel called, I let it ring until he left a message. I did not drop everything. That small shift of not immediately surrendering my time was a boundary. Boundaries are not walls built to keep people out. They are fences that mark what you will not allow. Another change was practical, the locks. I hired a locksmith whose hands were quick and whose smile was businesslike. The new locks went on with the same simple satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. I left a spare key only with Estella. My door felt like a small promise I made to myself. One night, the decision to act moved into something like strategy. I sat at my table and called the people I trusted, Ramirez, Victoria, Estella. We planned a meeting that would be a conversation and also a quiet reveal. I would call Miguel and ask him to come with Daniela, nothing to alarm them. That was the plan, to assemble the facts and have them present for a careful confrontation. The idea felt terrifying and right. There was a tenderness, too, in how I prepared. I ironed my blue blouse. I swept the floor, not to please anyone but because I wanted the space under my feet to feel clean. I arranged the little things that made my house mine, the radio tuned to a station that played quiet songs my mother loved, a vase with the soft marigolds I had kept from the mercado. These small acts were not trivial. They were a reclamation. When the night came and I sat with Canela and those papers, the fear still existed, but it was accompanied by a calm I had not felt since the first time I signed for the land. It was the same clarity that had driven me to work those extra hours, to save coins, to count the days until the roof was paid for. That clarity knows the price of things and the worth of them. I thought of what I would say. I practiced words that were not accusations but statements. This is my house. These are my rules. You will not sign for me. Those sentences were small but iron-barred. They were not meant to punish but to protect. I rehearsed them like a woman who has learned to speak after being taught to be silent. When I finally lay down, sleep came easier because my head had a plan. The plan was not violent. It was measured. It was legal. It was mine. The next morning, with the sun a thin promise through the curtains, I tied my keys on the red cord, patted Canela, and walked out as a woman who intended to take back what belonged to her. I was not naive. I was not a vengeful ghost. I was someone who had been patient for a lifetime and had reached the edge of endurance. I would not sign. The morning after I decided not to be quiet, the lights seemed to watch me for once. I felt the decision like a small stone in my stomach, heavy, true. I dressed slowly, my blue blouse smoothing over my shoulders like armor. I walked to the notary first. The smell of paper and old coffee warmed the tiny office. Ramirez looked up from a stack of files and his face softened when he saw me. I told him everything in the same slow sentences I say when I fold laundry. He listened with hands folded, then said words that felt like a net. We will make this official. We will make it hard to steal what is yours. He copied the deed with a careful hum. The photocopier spat out a pale, bureaucratic twin of the paper I remembered signing years ago. Ramirez stamped it 3 times. The stamp made a small, dry sound, like a knuckle rapping on a table. He also wrote and notarized a formal declaration: no property transactions without the owner's presence. I left with the stamped copy under my arm, a little shield against a world that had forgotten to be kind. At the bank, the air smelled of antiseptic and rubber. A young woman at the counter took my name and guided me to a small cubicle. She pulled my file and her face shifted in a way I had learned to read. Someone tried to add your son as a co-owner, she said, and the words clung to the air like steam. Signature didn't match. We blocked it. She showed me a photocopy of the attempted power of attorney, a clumsy signature, a different curl on the R from mine. It looked like a bad mimicry. My hands curled on the edge of the desk and did not tremble. I changed passwords, I set up alerts, I asked for a code phrase to be required. Locks and codes are small indignities. They are also safety. I left the bank feeling less raw. I went to Estella's with the copy of the deed pressed to my chest. Her kitchen smelled of frijoles and cinnamon. She brewed me a cup of tea and pressed my hand. We'll fix this together, she said, and I felt the ground tilt right side up a notch. Her grandson, the one who sells radios and chargers, came that afternoon and tucked a camera among the little objects on my living room shelf. He showed me how to check the footage on my old phone. The camera was small and quiet, like a mouse that refuses to leave. We hid it behind a ceramic rooster and a faded photograph of my mother. I practiced opening the app until the images came clear, my own home become a small stage that recorded what hands did when they thought no one watched. That night I slept at Estella's. Canela waited at home, probably puzzled by my absence. I could not rest. I kept thinking of the blue folder on my table, of the word permanent crossed out like a lie half hidden. But for the first time since the papers, I felt a plan forming like a map. The footage changed everything. Watching them on screen was worse and better than imagining it. Miguel and Daniela come through my door with keys that used to be mine. They move like people who have practiced innocence. They open drawers, lift loose floorboards, tug at envelopes. Their hands are intimate with my things. The camera caught the way Miguel's jaw set when he found nothing where he wanted it. The video caught Daniela's impatience, the way she smoothed her hair before she opened the old tin where I kept receipts. I printed the worst frames and folded them into an envelope. I took copies to Ramirez and to Victoria at the community center. Each piece of paper felt like a small torch in my bag. The evidence did not make the betrayal smaller, it made justice possible. I called Victoria. Her voice was a map. This is elder financial abuse, she said plainly. We can file. We can protect. We can make sure you don't lose a cent. Saying the words aloud made them real. It also made it harder for anyone to pretend nothing had happened. I told only a handful of people my plan. I told Estella and Ramirez and Victoria. I told the young man who had hidden the camera. I did not tell Miguel or Daniela. That would be a mistake. If they suspected, they would tidy their traces. Silence, for once, was a tool. Preparation was a prayer. I began to practice my voice. I practiced saying simple sentences that would be hard to twist. These are my papers. You will not take my home. I will not sign anything I do not understand. I repeated them until my temporary. I repeated. Daniela, you said, soon we'll be able to sell it, on the phone. Who else heard that? Daniela's fingers tightened on her bag. What you heard is not what we meant, she said, but the words had no weight. Victoria sat forward and explained plainly the legal consequences of the attempt to register Miguel as co-owner and of the falsified power of attorney. Ramirez pointed at the camera photos and explained, step by step, what they showed: entry with keys, rummaging in drawers, searching for documents. They tried to interrupt. Miguel's voice went small and pleading. Mama, we just wanted what's best. You'd be comfortable. Comfortable isn't deciding for me, I said. The sentence landed like a plate set down hard. The air changed. There was a jar of pickles on the shelf that trembled as if at a passing car. I told them exactly what I wanted. Return the original deed now, I said. Miguel, after a breath that sounded like a surrender, reached into his jacket and took out the paper. The paper was warm from his pocket. He put it on the table like an ugly gift. Second, I continued, you are not to have my keys. You will visit only when I invite you. Third, if this conversation ever happens again, if anyone tries this again, I will press charges. Silence is heavy when it is true. Daniela stood and said, let's go. Her voice was brittle. She left before Miguel. Miguel stayed to say some last selfish thing about how they meant well. Estella answered then. She did not shout. She simply told them that trust had been broken and would not be so easily repaired. When they left, the front door closed with a sound that I will remember, a small, definite click. The house felt both empty and clean. I sat and let the relief settle like tea in my stomach. But the night did not end with a neat tie. I lay awake thinking not of victory but of the cost. The house had been defended, yes. But the person I loved most had shown me his willingness to take what was mine. Love that robs is not love at all. In the days after, changes were practical and quiet. I changed the locks again, just to be sure. The bank placed holds and alerts. Victoria helped me file an official complaint formally recorded as attempted elder financial abuse. Ramirez drafted a simple, sharp letter to the real estate office with the agent's stamp, notifying them of the dispute and warning them away from any transaction. Neighbors noticed small things. Senora Antonia came to bring pan and a low-voiced apology for asking questions she should not have asked. Para lo que necesites, she said, and I believed her. The barrio began to hold me in a new way, like a secret that had become public. Miguel called. I let it ring. He left messages, half apology, half plea. I did not answer. The line between forgiveness and justice is a thin one. I wanted one without losing the other. Carlitos and Sofia still came sometimes. The children are like sunbeams that find every crack. Carlitos slipped me a drawing that said, in his crooked script, I love you, abuela. He did not ask for permission to visit. He came because he wanted to. Their small hands on my knees healed things that the adult words could not. Daniela did not return. Her absence is a small wound. The house is quieter in some ways, but not empty. Canella's little tail still beats the rhythm that keeps me steady. I had thought the confrontation would end everything. It did not end everything. It exposed what was done, yes. It put rules in place, yes. But it also became a new line drawn in the sand. We had spoken the truth aloud. That made the next moves clearer. The hardest part was not the legal work. It was the rearrangement of the heart. I had to accept that some relationships change shape forever. Acceptance was quiet and ferocious at once. I slept that night with my hands on the deed. I read it like a prayer. The paper smelled of ink and my own past. The house felt like a body that had been bruised and was beginning to heal. I thought it might be over. It was not. 6 months later, the house felt like a place that knew its owner again. I had painted a little strip of the fence a bright red. It was a small act of stubbornness. It said, "This is mine and I will choose its color." The locks held. The reja at the gate closed with a studied finality. The bank calls came into a number that only I and Victoria and Ramirez knew. I got messages on my phone every time a peso moved. Small alarms are a kind of comfort now. Miguel calls once a month, and we speak like people who are trying to remember where the warmth once lived. He asks after my health and if I need help with the roof. I answer and I mean what I say. I am not cruel. I am not the same woman who swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. Daniela has not set foot in my yard since that evening. I do not pretend not to miss the easy times. The loss sits in a corner of the room like a coat I don't wear anymore. Carlito still visits when he can. One afternoon he came with a paper crown and declared himself my king. He sits cross-legged on the floor and asks about my plants. "How do you keep them alive, abuela?" he asks. I tell him patience and a little talking. He believes me. Children have a way of restoring ordinary faith. I took up a small class with the women from the community center. We stitch and talk and sometimes we cry. Each of them carries a story, each of them brings bread. We trade fixes for curtains, sewing for recipes. There is power in shared experience. I learned that my story is not unique in its cruelty, but it is rare in its ending. We kept the house. I have a little ritual now. Every Sunday I bake a loaf of bread. The house smells of yeast and warmth. I take photographs with my phone canela mid-leap, the marigolds that survived a cold snap, the crust of my bread. I send some to Estella, who replies with emojis and a note, "Brava." Small messages that add up to daily armor. People ask if I forgive. Forgiveness is not a single gift. It is a process that returns and returns like the tide. I do not hold a grudge like a stone. I hold boundaries like a fence. I feed my heart and I fix the gates. The practical things remain. The complaint at the police is recorded, the bank keeps the alerts. Ramirez checks in now and then, not as a man who watches for drama but as a man who honors what the law can do. Victoria helped me connect with a group that watches for elder abuse in the area. I am part of a small circle that teaches other women to document, to copy, to save. That feels like making something good from something trying. Sometimes a neighbor will come by and ask, with a careful voice, "Do you regret standing your ground?" I look at my hands, the creases and the calluses, and I say, simply, I regret the hurt. I don't regret the standing. I have days of loneliness. I have days of a lightness I did not know possible. I cook for myself. I eat better. I sleep with both windows cracked. The night is honest and does not plot against me. There are mornings when I look at the house and I think of my younger self, the one who saved every coin in a tin labeled casa. I think of the sacrifices that seemed so small then and were so enormous now. I honor them by living in the home they bought me. If you are watching and you have felt small at the hands of someone who says they love you, know this: age does not make you invisible. Sitting in silence is not the only way to survive. There are laws, there are people, there are tactics. There are friends who will hide a camera and a lawyer who will stamp a paper until it is a shield. I will tell you something else, something I did not expect to learn. Holding your own life close can be an act of mercy. It is merciful to yourself to keep what you have earned. It is merciful to those